Bill's sister wrote, "They're beating Mama in last letter. He got it 2 days after she died." Roteiro test ready, English version. Duração alvo, 35-40 minutos. 60 caracteres. PUC, a carta que mudou tudo. 0,10%. Missouri, August 1863. The summer heat presses down on the forest like a weight. Cicadas scream in the trees. The air is so thick you can taste the dust. Deep in these woods, hidden from Union patrols, a guerrilla camp sits in uneasy silence. 30 men, maybe more. They sleep during the day and ride at night. They are the hunted ones, the men who fight a war without uniforms, without rules, without mercy. A rider approaches through the underbrush. His horse is lathered with sweat. He has been riding hard for 2 days straight, carrying something in his saddlebag, something that will change history. William Anderson sits by a dying fire, cleaning his revolver. He is 23 years old, tall, dark hair falling past his shoulders, eyes that have already seen too much death. The other men avoid him when he gets like this, when his hands move over his weapons with that focused intensity, when his jaw is set in that particular way. Bill Anderson has killed men, many men, Union soldiers, jayhawkers, anyone wearing blue or riding with those who do. The war has hardened him, but there is still something human behind those eyes. A flicker of the man he used to be. That flicker is about to go out. The rider dismounts. His legs are shaking from exhaustion. He does not say a word at first. He just reaches into his saddlebag and pulls out a folded piece of paper. The camp goes quiet. Even the cicadas seem to pause. Everyone knows what letters mean in this war. Letters bring news, and news is rarely good. Bill takes the paper from the rider's hand. It is thin, worn from travel, creased in the middle where it was folded, and there in the corner a dark stain. Bill does not know what that stain is. Not yet. He will learn, and when he does, something inside him will break forever. He unfolds the paper carefully. The handwriting is familiar. He would recognize it anywhere. It belongs to his youngest sister, Josephine, 14 years old, his favorite. The one who used to follow him around the farm like a shadow, the one who laughed at all his jokes, the one who cried when he left to join the guerrillas. The first words hit him like a bullet to the chest. "Dear brother, they are beating Mama." Bill reads those words again, then a third time. His hands begin to shake. The men around him notice. They exchange glances. They have never seen Bill Anderson's hands shake before. Not when Union cavalry charged their camp. Not when he took a bullet to the shoulder and kept fighting. Not ever. But now his hands are trembling so badly that the paper rustles like leaves in a storm. What Bill does not know, as he sits there reading his sister's desperate words, is that Josephine is already dead. She died 2 days ago. The letter he holds was written by a ghost, a 14-year-old ghost with charcoal-stained fingers and tears in her eyes. And what that letter contains will transform William Anderson into something else entirely. Something the Union Army will come to fear above all others. Something that will haunt the nightmares of soldiers for generations. They will call him Bloody Bill. This is not a story about war, not really. This is a story about what happens when a man receives a letter from his dead sister describing torture he was powerless to prevent. This is the origin of the most feared guerrilla fighter Missouri ever produced. This is the moment when a brother's love curdled into something dark and terrible and unstoppable. And it begins with 4 words. They are beating Mama. Remember those words. You will hear them again before this story is over. And when you do, you will understand why Bill Anderson became what he became. But first, let me tell you about the war that made this letter possible. Let me tell you about Missouri in 1863. Let me tell you about the hell that created Bloody Bill. And Texter, a guerra civil in Missouri, 10 to 25%. To understand what Bill Anderson was about to become, You must first understand Missouri in 1863. And to understand Missouri in 1863, you must forget everything you think you know about the Civil War. This was not the war you learned about in school. There were no grand battles here, no neat lines of blue and gray facing each other across open fields, no generals on horseback giving speeches before the charge, no flags waving in formation. Missouri was different. Missouri was personal. Missouri was neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother. Sons killing the men who had baptized them as children, fathers burying the boys who had played with their own sons. The state sat on the border between North and South. It was officially Union territory. The governor had pledged loyalty to Lincoln. Union troops occupied the cities. Blue flags flew over the courthouses, but the people were divided. Nearly half of Missouri's families owned slaves or supported the Confederate cause. They had relatives in the southern states. They shared the same values, the same culture, the same way of life. And when the war came, they did not simply accept Union rule. They fought back, in the shadows, in the forests, in the night. On one side, Union forces and their irregular militia called the Jayhawkers. These were Kansas men mostly. They had been fighting with Missouri slaveholders for years before the Civil War even started. They called it Bleeding Kansas. Both sides raided across the border, burning farms, killing settlers, stealing property. The war just gave them an excuse to keep doing what they had always done. On the other side, Confederate guerrillas known as bushwhackers. Men like William Clark Quantrill, men like Bill Anderson. They did not answer to any general in Richmond. They did not wear uniforms. They did not follow the rules of conventional warfare. They were partisans, irregulars, terrorists, the Union called them. Patriots, the Confederacy said. The bushwhackers had their own code. They wore civilian clothes with the guerrilla shirt, a loose-fitting garment covered in pockets for carrying extra ammunition. They grew their hair long. They carried multiple revolvers because reloading took too long in close combat. A bushwhacker might ride into battle with 4, 5, even 6 pistols tucked into his belt and boots. They attacked without warning. They struck convoys, patrols, supply trains. They killed Union soldiers wherever they found them. And then they vanished into the forests, into the farms of sympathetic families, into the hidden camps scattered across the Missouri wilderness. The Union could not catch them. For every bushwhacker they killed, 2 more seemed to take his place. The guerrillas knew the land. They had grown up in these forests. They could disappear into the woods like smoke. So the Union tried a different strategy. If you cannot catch the men, catch their families. In August 1863, Union General Thomas Ewing, Jr. issued an order that would change everything. General Order Number 10. It declared that any family suspected of supporting the guerrillas would be arrested and held as prisoners. Not the men, the women. The mothers, the sisters, the daughters, the wives. The logic was simple but cruel. You cannot catch guerrillas in the woods, but you can catch their families in their homes. You know where they live. You know their names. You have lists. And if you hold the families hostage, perhaps the guerrillas will surrender. Perhaps they will stop fighting to save the women they love. It was collective punishment. It was barbarism disguised as military necessity. And it was exactly the kind of mistake that turns ordinary enemies into fanatics. When Josephine wrote her letter to Bill, she was describing Order Number 10 in action. She was one of the women arrested. So was her mother Martha. So was her sister Mary. So were dozens of other women whose only crime was being related to men who fought for the Confederacy. They were rounded up from their homes at gunpoint. They were given minutes to pack a single bag. They were loaded onto wagons like cattle and transported to Kansas City, to a building that was never meant to hold prisoners. The structure stood on Grand Avenue, 3 stories tall. Built as a commercial property years earlier, The building was old. Its foundations were weak. Union engineers had actually inspected it before the women arrived. They filed a report. They warned that the structure was unstable. They said it should not be used for this purpose. But General Ewing needed somewhere to put the women. Kansas City was running out of space. The other buildings were full, and this one was available. So the engineers' warnings were ignored. The women were crammed into the upper floors. 30 of them, 40. The numbers varied depending on which source you believe. They slept on the floor. They had minimal food, minimal water, minimal everything. The Anderson sisters were among them. Martha Anderson, the mother, a woman in her 40s who had already lost her husband to Union violence. Now she was a prisoner, suspected of helping her guerrilla son. Mary Anderson, the older sister, 17 years old, quiet, reserved. She tried to keep the family together after their father died. And Josephine, the youngest, 14 years old, too young to understand what was happening, old enough to be terrified. The building creaked at night. The women could hear it. They could feel the floor shifting beneath them. Some of them talked about it in whispers. Something is wrong with this place. The walls are not straight. The foundation is moving. The guards told them to be quiet. The guards said the building was fine. The guards did not sleep in that building. Josephine found a piece of charcoal in the corner of her cell. She had no paper at first, but Mrs. Patterson, another prisoner, had brought a Bible. She tore out a blank page from the back. She gave it to Josephine. "Write to your brother," she said. "Tell him what is happening here." Josephine wrote. She wrote about the arrest. She wrote about the journey to Kansas City. She wrote about the building that groaned and shifted in the night. And she wrote about what the Union soldiers were doing to their mother. "They are beating Mama." That was how she began the letter. 4 words, simple words, a child's words. And then she wrote more. But before I tell you what the rest of that letter said, I need to tell you about the dark stain in the corner of the paper. The stain that Bill noticed when he first unfolded the letter. That stain was blood, Josephine's blood. The messenger who brought Bill the letter had something else in his saddlebag, something he was waiting to deliver, news that would arrive after Bill finished reading, news about what happened to that unstable building in Kansas City, news that would explain the blood, but we will get to that. First, you need to understand who Josephine Anderson was and what she meant to her brother. Backstory. A Familia Anderson, 25–40%. The Anderson family was not always divided by war. Before 1861, before the guns started firing, before everything fell apart, they were just a family, ordinary people trying to make a life on the frontier. William Anderson Sr. came to Kansas in the 1850s. He was a farmer from Kentucky. He had a wife named Martha and a growing brood of children. They settled near Council Grove, built a small homestead, started planting crops. Life was hard but good. The land was fertile. The weather was tolerable. The children grew strong. William Jr., whom everyone called Bill, was the first son. Born in 1840, he grew up fast on the frontier. By the time he was 10, he could ride a horse as well as any man. By 15, he could shoot straight enough to put food on the table. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's sharp eyes. But it was the youngest child who captured Bill's heart. Josephine came into the world in 1849. She was an unexpected gift. Martha was already in her 30s, past the age when most frontier women had their last child. But there she was anyway. A tiny, perfect thing with her brother's dark hair and her mother's stubborn chin. Bill was 9 years old when Josephine was born, old enough to help with the farm, old enough to have his own chores and responsibilities. But he made time for his baby sister. He was the one who rocked her cradle when she cried at night. He was the one who taught her to walk, holding her tiny hands while she took her first stumbling steps across the cabin floor. He was the one who carried her on his shoulders through the fields, pointing out the birds and the butterflies and the wildflowers that grew along the creek. As Josephine grew, the bond between them only strengthened. She followed him everywhere. When Bill went hunting, Josephine wanted to come. When Bill went fishing, Josephine wanted to come. When Bill sat on the porch cleaning his rifle, Josephine sat beside him, watching, asking questions, learning. The other children teased her about it. They called her Bill's shadow. They said she was more boy than girl, always running around in the dirt, always wanting to do what her brother did. Josephine did not care. Bill was her hero. Bill could do anything. Bill would always protect her. She kept every letter he ever wrote to her. Even as a young child, she collected them. She stored them in a wooden box under her bed. Sometimes at night, she would take them out and read them by candlelight. Even the letters that just said things like, "Dear Josie, hope you are well, will be home soon." She pressed the wildflowers he gave her into the pages of her Bible. Years later, when everything else was gone, those flowers were still there, dried and faded, but preserved. When Bill was 18 and Josephine was 9, something happened that foreshadowed what was to come. They were playing by the creek. Bill was teaching Josephine to skip stones across the water. She was not very good at it yet. Her throws kept splashing instead of skipping. Then she slipped. The bank was muddy from recent rain. Her foot went out from under her and she tumbled into the creek. The water was not deep, but the current was strong. It pulled her under before she could react. Bill did not hesitate. He dove in after her. He grabbed her arm and pulled her to the surface. He dragged her to the bank and held her while she coughed up water. "I've got you," he kept saying. "I've got you, Josie. I've got you." From that day forward, whenever Josephine was afraid, she remembered those words. "I've got you." Bill had said it. Bill meant it. Bill would always save her. She would remember those words again years later in a prison cell in Kansas City. And she would write them in a letter asking her brother to save her one more time. But by then, it would be too late. The war came to Kansas before it came anywhere else. Bleeding Kansas, they called it. The fight over whether the territory would enter the Union as a free state or a slave state. Both sides sent settlers. Both sides sent fighters. Both sides drew blood. The Anderson family tried to stay neutral. William Sr. was not a political man. He just wanted to farm his land and raise his children. He did not own slaves. He did not have strong opinions about whether others should. But in Kansas, neutrality was not an option. The Jayhawkers came first. Kansas abolitionists who raided Missouri farms, freed slaves, burned property. They said they were fighting for freedom. To the Missouri farmers, they were thieves and murderers. Then came the Missouri men, slaveholders and their supporters who crossed into Kansas to vote illegally, to intimidate settlers, to push the territory towards slavery. William Anderson Sr. got caught in the middle. The details of his death are unclear. Different sources tell different stories. Some say Union soldiers killed him in 1862. Others say it was Jayhawkers come to raid the farm and take what they could. Others say he was killed over a dispute about horses. What everyone agrees on is this: Bill Anderson watched his father die. He was 21 years old. He saw the men who did it. He knew their faces. And he swore on his father's grave that he would have vengeance. That was the moment Bill Anderson became a guerrilla. That was the moment he left his family and rode into the forests to join William Quantrill's band. But even then, even after everything that had happened, he still wrote to Josephine. His letters changed after their father's death. They became shorter, less frequent. He never told her what he did in the woods. He never described the raids or the killings. He never mentioned the blood on his hands. But he always asked about her. How was she feeling? What was she reading? Was she keeping up with her studies? Did she still have the horse he gave her? Josephine's letters back to him were longer. She wrote about everything: the weather, the neighbors, what the dog did that day, what she ate for dinner. She wrote as though the war was not happening, as though her brother was simply away on a long trip and would return any day. Maybe she believed that. Maybe she needed to believe it. But then came Order Number 10. Union soldiers arrived at what was left of the Anderson home in early August 1863. It was just after dawn. The dew was still on the grass. Martha was cooking breakfast over the fire. Mary was drawing water from the well. Josephine was still in bed, dreaming whatever dreams 14-year-old girls dream. The soldiers did not knock. They broke down the door. They came in with rifles raised, shouting orders. "Get up, get dressed, you are under arrest." Martha tried to argue. She tried to explain they were not soldiers. They were not helping the guerrillas. They were just women trying to survive. The soldiers did not listen. They had their orders. Any family connected to known bushwhackers was to be detained. Bill Anderson was a known bushwhacker. Therefore, his family was guilty. They gave the women 10 minutes to gather their belongings, 1 bag each. That was all they could bring. Josephine grabbed her Bible, the one with Bill's flowers pressed inside, the one with the blank pages in the back. She also managed to smuggle something else, a pencil, small enough to hide in the folds of her dress. She did not know why she took it. Some instinct told her she would need it. Then they were loaded onto a wagon and taken to Kansas City. But there was something else, something Josephine did before the soldiers came, before they were arrested, before everything went wrong. She hid something. In her letter to Bill, buried among the descriptions of the prison and the torture, was a phrase that seemed innocent at first. A phrase about a place they both knew. A childhood memory. It made no sense in context unless you understood that it was a code. Josephine had hidden something before the soldiers arrived, something she knew Bill would need, something valuable enough to risk a coded message in a letter that might be intercepted. The location was buried in her final letter. Bill would not discover the meaning of that phrase until much later. After everything else had happened, after the transformation was complete, after Josephine was dead and buried and avenged 100 times over. But that discovery would come. And when it did, it would prove that even in her final days, even as a prisoner facing torture, Josephine Anderson was still thinking of her brother, still trying to help him, still trying to be useful. Because that was who she was. Bill's shadow. Bill's helper, Bill's little Josie who followed him everywhere and wanted to do whatever he did. Even at the end, she was still trying to follow him. Bediti o evento principal, a carta completa, fortitude 60%. Let me tell you what the rest of that letter said, but first, understand the conditions under which it was written. Understand what Josephine faced every day in that prison. Understand what drove a 14-year-old girl to scratch words in charcoal on stolen paper and beg for rescue that would never come. The building on Grand Avenue was not designed to be a prison. It was designed to be a warehouse. The walls were thin. The windows were small and placed high. The summer heat turned the upper floors into an oven. The women slept on bare wooden planks. No beds, no mattresses, just hardboards and whatever blankets they had managed to bring from home. 30 women, 40 women, crammed into spaces meant for storing goods, not holding people. The food was minimal, bread mostly, sometimes soup, never enough. The women shared what they had. They divided their rations so the children could eat more. Some of them were mothers with young ones. Some of them had babies at their breasts. The guards walked the halls at all hours. Their boots echoed on the wooden floors. Sometimes they stopped at the doors. Sometimes they opened them. Sometimes they came inside. The women learned to fear certain guards. The ones who looked at them too long. The ones who made comments. The ones who found excuses to touch them when they passed. But that was not the worst of it. The worst of it was what happened to Martha Anderson. The Union wanted information. They wanted to know where Quantrill's camp was located. They wanted to know the guerrillas' plans. They wanted names, places, dates. They believed that the families knew these things. They believed the women were hiding information to protect their men. They were wrong. Martha Anderson did not know where Bill was. She had not seen him in months. His letters never included details about his location. He was too careful for that. But the interrogators did not believe her. Every morning, 2 soldiers came to the cell where the Anderson women were held. They took Martha and led her downstairs to a room on the ground floor, a room with a single chair in the middle and no windows. Josephine could hear what happened in that room. The walls were thin, remember, and sound carries. She could hear the questions. Where is your son? Where is Quantrill? Where are the camps? She could hear her mother's voice. I don't know. I don't know. Please, I don't know. She could hear the sounds that came after. The sounds of fists hitting flesh. The sounds of her mother crying out every day, for days, weeks, and then the interrogators tried something new. If beating Martha would not make her talk, perhaps watching her daughter suffer would. They started bringing Josephine to the interrogation room, not to beat her, not at first, just to make her watch. They sat her in a corner. They told her to keep her eyes open. They told her that if she looked away, they would hurt her too. And then they went to work on her mother. Josephine watched. What choice did she have? A 14-year-old girl in a room full of armed men. She watched them hit her mother. She watched them knock her mother to the floor. She watched them drag her back into the chair and start again. She watched until she could not watch anymore, until her mind went somewhere else, until she learned to leave her body behind and float away to a place where none of this was happening. And then, after the session was over, the soldiers gave her paper and a pencil. They told her to write to her brother. They told her to describe what she had seen. They told her that if she did not, tomorrow would be worse. That was the letter Bill was reading, a letter written under duress, a letter dictated by torturers, a letter designed to break him. But it was also something more, because Josephine was smart, smarter than the soldiers who watched her write. She followed their instructions. She described the torture. She begged her brother to come, but she also included other things the soldiers did not understand. The coded message about the hidden item, references to childhood memories that only Bill would recognize, little signs that she was still herself, still thinking, still fighting in her own way. The soldiers read the letter before it was sent. They saw nothing suspicious, just a frightened girl begging for rescue. Perfect. Exactly what they wanted. They let it go. Josephine's handwriting changed as the letter went on. The first paragraphs were neat, careful, almost formal. The words the soldiers made her write. But as she continued, the letters became smaller, more cramped. These were her own words now, the things she added after the soldiers lost interest. She wrote about the building where they were being held, 3 stories tall. The women on the upper floors, guards at every door. The windows were nailed shut. The summer heat was unbearable. There was no breeze, no relief. She wrote about the other prisoners, women she had never met before, but who had become her family in captivity. Mrs. Patterson, who gave her the Bible paper, Mrs. Mundy, whose husband rode with Quantrill, Mrs. McCorkle, who had 3 children with her in the cell. They shared what little food they had. They prayed together at night. They told each other stories to pass the time. She wrote about the sounds, the creaking of the building at night, the footsteps of the guards above and below, the crying of children who had been taken with their mothers, the building groaning as though in pain, the way the floor shifted when too many people walked on it at once. She wrote about the fear. I try to be brave, brother. I try to be like you. But at night, when everyone is sleeping, I am so scared. I do not know what they will do to us. I do not know if we will ever leave this place. I hear the building talking at night. It sounds like it is sick, like it is dying. The other women hear it too. We try not to think about what it means. And then she wrote about the letter itself. I am writing this with charcoal, brother. They took our ink. They took our pencils after I wrote the first part. I found this piece of charcoal in the corner of my cell. I'm writing on paper torn from Mrs. Patterson's Bible. She said it was all right. She said God would understand. I hope he does. I hope you do. The letter Bill was reading was written in charcoal. That was why some of the words were smudged. That was why parts of it were hard to read. His 14-year-old sister had scraped burnt wood across holy paper to send him a message. And the stain in the corner, that dark stain that Bill noticed when he first unfolded the letter. That stain was beginning to make sense now. Josephine continued writing. Mama does not know I am writing to you. She would tell me to stop. She would say it is too dangerous. But I had to tell you what is happening. I had to let you know. They come for her every morning, brother. 2 soldiers, always the same ones. One has a scar on his face. The other one laughs. They take her downstairs. I do not see what happens next, but I hear it. I hear Mama crying out. I hear them asking questions. And then they bring her back. Every day she looks worse. Every day there is less of her. Her eyes are going empty. She does not talk to us anymore. She just lies there and stares at the wall. I asked her once what they wanted to know. She said they wanted to know where you were, where Quantrill's camp was. She said she told them she did not know. She said that was the truth. But they do not believe her. They think we are all liars. They think we are hiding you somewhere. They think she is lying to protect you, brother. They think all of us know where you are, but we do not. I wish we did. I wish you could come and take us away from here. I wish you could make it stop. That was when Josephine wrote the question that Bill could never answer. Will you come for us, brother? Will you save us like you used to save me when I was little? I remember when I fell in the creek and you pulled me out. I remember when the dog chased me and you stood between us. I remember when Papa died and you held me while I cried. I remember everything you did for me. Please come. Brother, please. I know you are brave. I know you can do anything. You always told me that. You said nothing could stop you. You said you would always protect me. Were you telling the truth? Please come, brother, please. Bill sat there in the guerrilla camp, holding those words in his hands. His sister was begging him to save her. His mother was being tortured. His family was dying in a prison while he sat in the forest cleaning his guns. And he was powerless to do anything. He could not surrender. If he did, the Union would hang him. They had already made that clear. Bushwhackers did not get trials. They did not get prisoner exchanges. They got ropes. And then who would protect his family? No one. He could not attack Kansas City. The guerrillas numbered a few hundred at most. The Union had thousands of soldiers in the city. It would be suicide, and his family would still die, probably faster as the Union executed them in reprisal. He could not negotiate. The Union did not negotiate with bushwhackers. They called them outlaws, bandits, murderers. There was no surrender that did not end in a noose. Bill Anderson sat there, reading his sister's words, and he felt something he had never felt before. Complete and utter helplessness, the worst feeling in the world for a man who had promised to always protect her. And then the messenger spoke. The man had been standing there the whole time, watching Bill read, watching his face change, watching his hands shake. He had more news to deliver, but he had been waiting for the right moment. Now, seeing Bill's face, he knew there would never be a right moment. There's something else, the messenger said. His voice was quiet, hesitant. Something you need to know. Bill looked up from the letter. His eyes were wet. He did not try to hide it. He did not care who saw. The building, the messenger said, the one in Kansas City, where they were keeping the women. What about it? The messenger swallowed hard. He had been dreading this moment for 2 days. Ever since he got the news and started riding to find Bill, he had practiced what he would say. He had rehearsed the words in his head, but now that the moment was here, all his preparation fled. It collapsed, Bill. 2 days ago, the whole thing came down. They're saying the foundations gave way. The walls buckled, 3 stories of brick and timber straight into the ground. Bill did not move. He did not breathe. He just sat there, the letter in his hand, staring at the messenger. "They're pulling bodies out of the rubble," the messenger continued. "Some of the women survived, but not all of them, not most of them. The upper floors, where they kept most of the prisoners, those floors came down the hardest." "My family," Bill said. His voice was barely a whisper, less than a whisper, a breath shaped into words. "What about my family?" The messenger reached into his saddlebag again. He pulled out another piece of paper. This one was not a letter. It was a list of names, handwritten, copied from a Union casualty report. The names of the dead. He handed it to Bill. Bill looked down at the list. His eyes scanned the names, one by one, letter by letter, looking for the ones he prayed he would not find. He found them. Josephine Anderson, age 14, deceased. Mary Anderson, age 17, deceased. Martha Anderson was not on the list. She had survived, but the messenger had more to say about that too. "Your mother lived," he said, "but her back is broken. The beams fell on her. They say she will never walk again. They have her in a hospital, under guard, still a prisoner even now." Bill looked at the letter in his left hand, then at the list of names in his right hand. His sister had been dead for 2 days. She had been dead before the letter even reached the camp. She had been dead while Bill was sleeping, while Bill was eating, while Bill was sitting by this fire, not knowing, not feeling, not sensing that half his world had just collapsed along with that building. The words he had just read, the desperate plea from a frightened girl, the question she had asked him, "Will you come for us, brother?" She had written those words, and then she had died before he could answer. The building fell on her. The building the Union knew was unsafe. The building the engineers had warned about. The building General Ewing had filled with women anyway because he needed somewhere to put his hostages. Josephine Anderson, age 14, crushed under 3 stories of Missouri brick. Bill Anderson stood up slowly. The men around him backed away. They could see something changing in his face, something shifting behind his eyes, something being born in the space where his humanity used to live. He folded the letter carefully. He put it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. Then he folded the list of names and put it there too. He would carry both pieces of paper for the rest of his life. Then he reached down and picked up his revolvers. "Where are you going?" one of the men asked. His voice was nervous, uncertain. He had never seen Bill look like this before. None of them had. Bill did not answer. He just started walking toward his horse. Someone else called out, "Bill, Bill, wait!" Bill stopped. He turned around, and when the men saw his face, they understood. The Bill Anderson they had known was gone. The brother, the son, the man who still wrote letters to his little sister asking about her horse. That man had died somewhere between reading the letter and reading the list. Someone else was standing there now. Someone they would soon call Bloody Bill. "Andan sees studious consequences o nascimento de Bloody Bill, 60–80%. In the days that followed, Bill Anderson did not speak. He ate when food was put in front of him. He slept for a few hours each night, though he seemed to get no rest from it. He woke screaming sometimes, shouting his sister's name. The other guerrillas learned to keep their distance when that happened, but mostly he just sat by himself reading that letter over and over again. The charcoal words were already starting to smudge from being handled so much. But it did not matter. Bill had memorized every line. He could recite the whole thing from memory, word for word, pause for pause. The other guerrillas watched him with a mixture of concern and fear. They had seen men break before. The war did that to people. It shattered them, left them hollow and useless, and waiting to die. But Bill was not breaking, not in that way. He was transforming. Something was hardening inside him. Something was crystallizing around that letter like ice forming around a stone. Whatever capacity for mercy he had once possessed was being frozen out. Whatever compassion, whatever humanity. What was left behind was something else, something colder, something more dangerous. 1 week after he received the news, Bill rode to Kansas City, not to attack, not yet, not with 30 men against thousands, just to see. He rode through the night. He arrived at dawn. He found a hill overlooking the city and he stopped there, watching. The ruins of the building on Grand Avenue were still visible. 3 stories of brick and timber collapsed into a heap of rubble. Union soldiers were still there, picking through the debris. They had not even finished removing all the bodies. Bill watched for hours. He watched them pull bricks aside. He watched them carry out stretchers covered with white sheets. He watched them load wagons with the dead. And somewhere in that rubble, somewhere under all that brick and mortar and shattered wood, was his sister's body. 14 years old, crushed, gone. The Union had known. The engineers had known. General Ewing had known. The building was unsafe. The foundations were crumbling. And they had filled it with women anyway. They had killed his sister, not in battle, not face to face. They had killed her with bureaucratic negligence. They had killed her with indifference. They had killed her with the casual cruelty of men who saw Confederate families as less than human. Bill turned his horse around and rode back to camp. The next day, he called the men together. His voice was calm, flat, empty of emotion. That was somehow more frightening than if he had been screaming. "We ride for Lawrence," he said, "in 3 days. Lawrence, Kansas." Every guerrilla in Missouri knew that name. Lawrence was the heart of Jayhawker territory, the town that had sent raiders into Missouri for years, the town where the abolitionist movement was strongest, the town where Senator Jim Lane lived, the man who had organized some of the most vicious Kansas raids into Missouri. Lawrence was also the town where many of the soldiers who had arrested Bill's family came from. The town that had celebrated when the building collapsed and Confederate women died. The Union newspapers in Lawrence had called it justice, divine retribution, God's punishment upon the rebel sympathizers. Now Bill Anderson was going to show them what retribution really looked like. No one argued with him. No one asked questions. They could see in his eyes that questions would not be welcome. They could see that the man standing before them was not the Bill Anderson they had known. This was someone new, someone driven by something beyond anger, beyond revenge, something that went deeper than hate. 3 days later, on August 21st, 1863, William Quantrill led his guerrillas into Lawrence, Kansas. Bill Anderson was at the front of the column, 400 men, the largest guerrilla force ever assembled in Missouri. They had ridden through the night, avoiding Union patrols, moving like ghosts through the Kansas countryside. They arrived at dawn. The town was still asleep. Smoke rose from chimneys. Dogs barked in the distance. Somewhere, a rooster crowed. Then the killing began. What happened next became known as the Lawrence Massacre. It remains one of the most controversial events of the Civil War, the bloodiest single day of the guerrilla conflict. A horror that is still debated by historians more than a century and a half later. The guerrillas entered the town from multiple directions. They went from house to house. They dragged men from their beds. They shot them in front of their families. They had a list, names of men known to support the Union cause, men who had participated in raids into Missouri, men who had celebrated the deaths of Confederate women. But the list was just a starting point. By the time the sun was fully up, the guerrillas were killing anyone they could find. Any man, any male old enough to carry a rifle. They were thorough, they were systematic, they were merciless. Bill Anderson killed more than anyone else that day. Witnesses later described him moving through the streets like a man possessed. He did not hesitate. He did not show mercy. He asked only one question before pulling the trigger. "Were you there when the building fell?" Most of the men he asked had no idea what he was talking about. They were not soldiers. They had not been in Kansas City. They were shopkeepers and farmers and school teachers. They had nothing to do with Order Number 10 or the prison or the collapse. It did not matter. Bill shot them anyway. One survivor, a man who had hidden in a well and lived to tell about it, later described what he saw. Anderson was like a machine. He walked through town with 2 pistols, one in each hand. When they were empty, he pulled 2 more from his belt. When those were empty, he pulled 2 more. He must have killed 20 men before noon, maybe more, and his face never changed, not once. He was not angry. He was not excited. He was empty. That was the worst part. His eyes were completely empty. By the time Quantrill finally called retreat, nearly 200 men were dead. The town was in flames. Entire blocks had been reduced to smoking rubble. It was the single deadliest day of the guerrilla war in Missouri, and it was just the beginning. After Lawrence, everything changed. The Union put a price on Bill Anderson's head, $5,000 for anyone who could bring him in dead or alive. It was the largest bounty in the state, more than the bounty on Quantrill himself. But the bounty only made Bill more famous, more feared. Men who wanted to fight the Union began seeking him out. They wanted to ride with the man who had burned Lawrence. They wanted to be part of his legend. Bill let them come. He needed men. He needed soldiers. Because Lawrence was not enough. It would never be enough. There was a debt to be paid, and no amount of blood could ever fully satisfy it. He carried his sister's letter everywhere he went. He kept it in his shirt pocket next to his heart, just like the first day. The paper became worn and soft from being handled so often. The charcoal words began to fade, but Bill could recite every line from memory. He did not need to see them anymore. They were carved into his mind, into his soul. He also kept something else. When the building collapsed, some of Josephine's belongings had survived the destruction. One of them was a dress, a blue cotton dress that she had been wearing the day she was arrested. Someone had pulled it from the rubble and sent it to Bill through the underground network that connected guerrilla families. The dress was stained with blood. Josephine's blood. The same blood that had left the dark stain on the corner of her letter. Bill kept the dress wrapped in oilcloth, tucked into his saddlebag. He never showed it to anyone. He never talked about it. But sometimes, late at night, when the other men were sleeping, he would take it out and hold it, just hold it, for hours. The men who rode with him learned not to disturb him during those moments. They learned to pretend they did not see. They learned that some grief was too private to witness. They also learned not to question his methods, because Bill Anderson's methods were about to become legendary. In the months after Lawrence, Bill split from Quantrill's main force. He formed his own band of guerrillas, smaller, faster, more brutal. They called themselves Anderson's Bushwhackers. They wore their hair long, almost to their shoulders. They dressed in the guerrilla shirt, the distinctive garment covered with pockets for carrying ammunition. They carried more pistols than any other unit. Some of them rode into battle with 8 or 9 revolvers strapped to their bodies. They attacked Union patrols without warning. They ambushed supply wagons. They raided towns that supported the Union cause. They struck fast and vanished faster, and Bill began a new practice. He started taking scalps. After each battle, Bill would walk among the Union dead. He would kneel down beside each soldier, and he would cut off a piece of their scalp, just a small piece, a trophy, a marker. He tied the scalps to his horse's bridle, one for each kill. The horse's mane became a grisly collection of dried flesh and matted hair. By September 1864, Bill Anderson's horse had so many scalps hanging from it that they brushed against his legs as he rode. The Union soldiers who saw him coming said it was the most terrifying sight of the war. This man with empty eyes and long dark hair, mounted on a horse decorated with the remains of his enemies. They called him Bloody Bill. The name stuck. The legend grew. Union soldiers told stories about him around campfires. They said he could not be killed. They said he had sold his soul to the devil. They said he was not human anymore, if he ever had been. And somewhere in his shirt pocket, pressed against his heart, was still that letter. "They are beating Mama." Will you come for us, brother? He had not been able to save her, but he could avenge her. Every Union soldier he killed was a payment on the debt. Every scalp was a coin in a terrible ledger, and he was far from finished. O destino, Centralia e os 53 scalps, 80-95%. September 27th, 1864. Centralia, Missouri. This is where Bill Anderson's story reaches its climax. This is where the letter finally had its full and terrible effect. This is where Bloody Bill earned his name for all time. Centralia was a small town, a railroad stop on the North Missouri Railroad. Nothing special about it. A few hundred people, a general store, a hotel, a depot where trains stopped to take on water and passengers. But on that September morning, something special happened. Bill Anderson and his guerrillas rode into town just as a train was arriving from the east. They had been raiding in the area for days. The Union knew they were nearby but could not catch them. The guerrillas moved too fast. They knew the land too well. The train was a passenger train, civilians mostly, farmers and merchants traveling to St. Louis or beyond. But among the passengers were soldiers, Union soldiers, 24 of them, all wearing blue uniforms. They were not armed. These were not combat troops. They were soldiers on furlough, men who had been fighting in other states and were now heading home to visit their families. They had left their weapons in their units. They carried nothing but their travel papers and their uniforms. Bill's men stopped the train. They ordered everyone off. The civilians were pushed aside, frightened but largely unharmed. The soldiers were separated from the rest, 24 men in blue, standing in the September sun, unarmed and terrified. Bill Anderson walked down the line. He looked at each face. He asked each man the same question he had asked in Lawrence more than a year earlier. Were you there when the building fell? None of them had been. These were young men from Iowa and Illinois and Indiana. They had never been to Kansas City. They had never heard of Order Number 10. They had nothing to do with the Anderson family or the prison or the collapse. They tried to explain. They begged. They pleaded. Some of them fell to their knees. Bill's face did not change. Strip, he said. Take off your uniforms. The soldiers complied. What choice did they have? They stood there in their underclothes, shivering despite the warmth, waiting to find out if they would live or die. They did not live. Bill shot them, all 24, one by one, methodically, without anger, without satisfaction, just the steady crack of pistol fire and the thump of bodies hitting the ground. Then he stripped the bodies completely. He left them lying naked in the street, arranged in a row, their uniforms taken as trophies. The survivors of Centralia, the civilians who had watched everything happen, later described Bill's face during the killings. They said it was completely blank. No anger, no rage, no emotion at all, just emptiness. The same emptiness that Survivor had described in Lawrence. The same emptiness that had been there since the day Bill read his sister's letter. After the executions, Bill and his men rode out of town. They did not go far. They knew what would happen next. The Union would send soldiers. The Union always sent soldiers, and Bill wanted to be there when they arrived. He was counting on it. Major A.V.E. Johnson reached Centralia that afternoon with 150 men. Most of them were new recruits from the 39th Missouri Infantry. Green soldiers who had never seen real combat. They had been stationed nearby for garrison duty. Now they were being sent to deal with the guerrillas who had just committed mass murder. They were armed with single-shot Enfield rifles, good weapons for conventional warfare, terrible weapons for close combat. It took time to reload an Enfield, 15 seconds at least, more if your hands were shaking. Bill Anderson had 80 men. Every one of them was a veteran guerrilla. Every one of them had been fighting this way for years. Every one of them carried multiple revolvers, 6 shooters that could fire again and again without stopping to reload. Major Johnson made a mistake. He saw the guerrillas forming up in a field outside town. He saw that they were outnumbered almost 2 to 1. He ordered his men to dismount and form a firing line. That was his second mistake. In conventional warfare, infantry fought on foot. That was how you achieved accuracy. That was how you maintained discipline. That was how professional soldiers were trained. But this was not conventional warfare. When Johnson's force advanced into the field, rifles at the ready, Bill Anderson gave a signal. His men charged, 80 horsemen with revolvers, screaming the rebel yell, riding straight at the Union line. Johnson's men fired, one volley, ragged, panicked. Most of the shots went wide. A few guerrillas fell, but the charge did not slow. And then the Union soldiers tried to reload. 15 seconds, that was all it took to reload an Enfield rifle. 15 seconds, that might as well have been 15 years. The guerrillas crashed into the Union line before a second volley could be fired. They rode through the infantry like water through a broken dam, pistols cracking, sabers flashing, men screaming and falling and dying. The battle, if you could call it that, lasted 15 minutes. When it was over, 123 Union soldiers were dead, including Major Johnson, including nearly every man he had brought with him. Bill Anderson's losses, 2 killed, 8 wounded. It was the most lopsided victory of the guerrilla war, perhaps the most lopsided victory of the entire Civil War. And then came the part that would seal Bill Anderson's legend forever. He walked among the bodies afterward. He took his time. He knelt beside each Union soldier, living or dead. Those who were still alive he finished with his pistol. Then he went to work with his knife. 53 scalps. That was the count when he finished. 53 new trophies for his horse's bridle, added to the hundreds that were already there. And as he rode away from Centralia, the letter still in his pocket, Bill Anderson was the most feared man in Missouri, perhaps the most feared man in America. The Union was terrified. They had never faced anything like this. Reports came in from across the state. Soldiers were refusing to patrol. Garrisons were locking themselves inside their forts. Entire regiments were asking to be transferred elsewhere. No one wanted to meet Bloody Bill on the road. One Union commander wrote in his journal, "Anderson is not human. He is a force of nature, a storm in human form, and we cannot stop him any more than we could stop a tornado." But storms do not last forever, and Bill Anderson's storm was about to reach its end. 1 month after Centralia, on October 26, 1864, Bill Anderson met his death. He was riding near Albany, Missouri, with a small group of his men. A Union patrol spotted them, militia from Ray County, local men who knew the land as well as the guerrillas did. Bill did what he always did when confronted by Union troops. He charged. It had worked 100 times before, 1,000 times. The guerrilla charge was unstoppable. The Union soldiers always broke. They always ran. They always died. This time was different. The militia did not run. They held their ground. They formed a line. They aimed carefully. They fired. A bullet struck Bill Anderson in the back of his head. He fell from his horse and hit the ground hard. By the time his men reached him, by the time they fought off the militia and recovered his body, William Anderson was already dead. He was 24 years old. The Union soldiers found his body and searched it. They wanted proof. They wanted to be sure that Bloody Bill was really dead. In his shirt pocket, pressed against his heart, they found a worn piece of paper covered in faded charcoal writing. The words were almost illegible now, smudged by a year of handling. But you could still make out the first line, "Dear brother, they are beating Mama," in his saddlebag, wrapped in oilcloth. They found a blue cotton dress stained with old blood. They did not know what it meant. They assumed it was a trophy of some kind, a relic from some raid or another. They did not understand. How could they? They had not read the letter. They had not seen Bill's face when he learned his sister was dead. They had not watched him transform from a man into something else. But those of us who know the story understand. Bill Anderson had carried his sister's letter for 14 months. Every raid, every battle, every scalp. He had kept her words with him through all of it. "They are beating Mama. Will you come for us, brother?" He had never been able to answer her question. Not the way she wanted, not the way he wanted. but he had done everything in his power to avenge her death. The Union soldiers who killed him displayed his body in Richmond, Missouri. They propped it up for photographs. They wanted everyone to see that Bloody Bill was dead, that the nightmare was over. In the photographs, Bill Anderson looks almost peaceful. His long hair hangs down past his shoulders. His eyes are closed. His face shows no expression. He looks like he is finally resting. Reflexão, o legado de uma carta, 95 a 100%. What do we make of Bill Anderson? History has not been kind to him, and perhaps it should not be. The things he did, the scalps, the massacres, the men killed in cold blood, these are not the actions of a hero. These are the actions of a man who had crossed over into something dark and terrible. Some historians call him a monster. They point to Lawrence, to Centralia, to the 53 scalps he took in a single afternoon. They say he was a sadist who used his family's tragedy as an excuse to indulge his bloodlust. They say the Civil War gave him permission to do what he had always wanted to do. Others call him a victim. They say he was a normal man, maybe even a good man, who was driven insane by grief. They say the Union created him when they arrested his family and let them die in that building. They say Bloody Bill was not born, he was made, manufactured by cruelty and indifference and the casual brutality of war. The truth, as always, is more complicated than either story. Bill Anderson was both things, monster and victim, killer and mourner. He held his sister's letter against his heart while he cut scalps from the dead. He wept over a blood-stained dress while he planned massacres. He was not a symbol. He was a man, a broken man, certainly, a dangerous man, absolutely, but a man nonetheless, a man who loved his little sister and lost her and never recovered from the loss. The question that stays with me is this: what would you do? Imagine receiving a letter from your little sister. She's 14 years old. She writes that she is watching your mother being tortured. She describes the sounds, the crying, the questions that never stop. She begs you to come save her. She asks if you will be her protector, like you always were. Will you come for us, brother? And then you find out she's already dead, that she died before you could even read her words, that she was crushed under a building that the enemy knew was going to collapse, that they put her there anyway because they needed somewhere to store their hostages, and they did not care if the foundation crumbled. What would that do to you? I do not know what it would do to me. I hope I never find out. But I know what it did to Bill Anderson. It transformed him. It emptied him out and filled him with something else, something cold and relentless and completely without mercy, something that could only be satisfied by blood. A 14-year-old girl wrote a letter in charcoal on Bible paper. She asked her brother to save her, and when he could not, when she died before he could even try, that letter became the most dangerous document in Missouri because it created Bloody Bill. And Bloody Bill killed more Union soldiers than any other individual in the Civil War's Western theater, more than any general, more than any regiment. One man, with a letter in his pocket and a horse covered in scalps, terrorizing an entire army. All because of a letter, all because of 4 words. They are beating Mama. That is the power of love when it turns to rage. That is what happens when a gentle older brother who once brought wildflowers to his little sister watches everything he loves destroyed. That is what happens when protection fails and grief finds no outlet except violence. History remembers Bill Anderson as a killer, but before he was a killer, he was a brother, a son, a young man who taught his sister to skip stones and pulled her from the creek when she fell in, a man who wrote her letters asking about her horse, a man who failed to protect his family and spent the rest of his short life trying to make up for it. He never could. The debt was too large. The hole in his heart was too deep. No amount of blood could fill it. No number of scalps could bring Josephine back, but he tried. God help him, he tried, and that letter, that worn piece of paper covered in charcoal, went with him to the grave. Some say it is still out there somewhere, preserved in a museum or a private collection. A piece of Bible paper with a child's handwriting, describing torture, asking for rescue, begging a brother to do what brothers are supposed to do. If you ever see it, remember what it represents. Not just a letter, not just words on paper, a transformation, the birth of Bloody Bill, and the death of everything William Anderson once was. The Civil War produced many horrors, battles that killed tens of thousands in a single day, prisons where men starved to death by the thousands. Atrocities on both sides that still haunt us, but perhaps no single document produced more violence, more death, more destruction than one letter written by a 14-year-old girl to her older brother. 4 words to start. They are beating Mama. 5 words to end. Will you come for us? 123 dead at Centralia, nearly 200 dead at Lawrence. Countless others in the raids and ambushes and murders that came between. All because a brother read his sister's letter too late. This is the story of that letter. This is the story of William Anderson and his sister Josephine. This is the story of how love can become hate, how grief can become rage, how a man can become a monster. This is how history is made. One word at a time, one tragedy at a time, one letter at a time, and somewhere in the archives of history, a piece of Bible paper covered in charcoal still holds those words. They are beating Mama. Will you come for us, brother? Please come, please. Begitas de Sihiku, fim do roteiro, versão em inglês. Contagem final, 58. 0 caracteres. Formato, TTs ready, sem asteriscos, sem colchetes no texto narrado. Estilo, terceira pessoa narrativa com citações em primeira pessoa. Loops incluídos. Mancha escura na carta. Pergunta de Josephine, mensageiro com mais notícias. Frase lida 3 vezes, carta encontrada no corpo. Reviravoltas incluídas. Josephine usada para fazer mãe falar, carta escrita com carvão. Josephine já morta quando Bill lê, código na carta. Union sabia que prédio era instável.